But even if you're going directly to production, we still enforce that there has to be evidence of testing, there has to be evidence of approvals and segregation of duties before you can deploy. So even though you're shortcutting the process because you got to get this out now, you still have a level of degree of confidence over what is being deployed.
This episode is brought to you by Greenskies Analytics, an audit analytics service provider that works with internal audit departments that have data analysts and are still frustrated with trying to make analytics actually work, aren't getting the expected ROI, who can't break through the communication barrier between the analysts and the audit team, and those that need experienced direction for an audit analytics strategy and process. Those that feel like they've wasted time and money on trainings, aren't getting the value they want, not prioritizing the highest risk areas for the organizations, or have projects that seemingly never get completed. Do you deal with any of that? If you do, go to the show notes of this episode and click the Greenskies Analytics link, or go to greenskiesanalytics.com to schedule a call and understand how Greenskies Analytics makes analytics actually work for internal audit.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Russell, and today on the show, we have Taylor Meadows. Taylor was formerly an auditor with PwC, and he basically did all this manual work around change management. So like on the IT side, we need to change functionality in whatever, the GL, some system or application. Here's the controls you have to follow to do that. And so it's a very manual process. And I think it was birthed then in Taylor's brain to go, we could probably build software to solve this problem. So now Taylor is the founder and CEO of Change Captain. Again, where he took these kind of manual procedures that he used to do, this manual advisory work, and has turned it into software. So basically, this is how it works. You want a change made to an application that you work with. It goes to a developer. The developer develops the change, writes the code. A independent person that wrote the code tests the code, says, yep, this thing works like we thought it would work. And then it goes maybe to another person to approve it, to move it into the actual production system, or maybe it goes to a committee as well to get approval for that, and then it goes. And then sometimes, as things can happen, you log in and things have blown up or it's not where you thought it would be. Either way, testing those changes is kind of a pain. It's not very fun. It's very much, if you're in IT audit, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so again, Taylor built this tool to solve this problem. And so there's a couple things it does. One, you basically print out a report and then you can go, yep, change management, done. Change management testing, done. The other thing that is super interesting about it is that it takes into account these R&D tax credits that you can get. So if you're building new functionality into some system that you have in your organization, you can get tax credits for that on the R&D side. And typically the way that's done is you bring in a team of accountants and they have to go through all this work, and it can take a lot of time and effort to do that. And what they've done at Change Captain is basically, again, automated that to where you print a report and you go, here you go, accountants and CPAs, we're good to go now. And so it is probably one of the coolest things that I've seen software-wise. Taylor gets into kind of all the details around that, but we also talk about how people currently audit code changes, so a little bit more detail as to what I was talking about, the risk of that. And then again, a little deeper dive on, okay, folks that are using Change Captain, this change management tool, what are basically the benefits? What are clients doing with the data? So they have all this data. As you, a lot of folks know, we have the data. What are we supposed to do with it? As well as the huge impact of those R&D tax credits. So here we go. So how are you using AI, whether that's ChatGPT or whatever your LLM of choice is, or any Gen AI tools or anything in general? I know you're very much on the tech side of things. So what are you doing professionally? Cool. Personally, just as cool. Anything that you feel like the listeners could use or get some level of value out of, or just find funny if that's the case?
Yeah. I'd say the number one way I'm using AI right now is to learn. Back in the day, we had to learn out of textbooks, and then now we have the ability to just Google information. Well, this is that next level where I don't need to go read 20 different articles to find the answer to my question. I can ask a very specific question and get a very specific answer to that. So that's incredibly helpful. And especially founding my own company, that was something that there's a lot of things I've never done before. Makes it a heck of a lot easier to learn than it ever has. And now we're actually using AI within our own product. So you don't have to go read some knowledge paper or white paper to, hey, how do I do this? You can literally just talk to the chatbot and it will explain, hey, you want to do step one, step two, step three. This is why you do it. You can have straight up conversations with it, as well as it integrating into the actual data analytics. So you can ask questions, hey, how's my team doing? Who are my best performers? Who are my, least performers? Just getting insight into what people are actually working on.
Okay. And we'll get into the tool and more specifically what you're talking about. Is there anything within that where you're learning? Is there any like more like on the hobby side or personal interests, like personal research, anything like that that you've taken up?
Not a whole lot right now on the personal side. I mean, right now, my personal side is honestly change captain. Um, I don't have a whole lot of hobbies at this point, but um, yeah, I mean I mean it's really cool what you can do with AI. And if you use like, Dolly, for example, you can generate tons of different images. You can use Sora in order to generate different videos. So we're starting to leverage that in order to create different content in order to put on to, LinkedIn or wherever for advertisement purposes. But I mean, you can use this for anything you want. It's amazing at what you can create with nothing more than a text-based prompt.
So really, we're talking change management, and just to kind of set the stage a little bit, change management relative to IT or ITGCs, as opposed to change management in culture or some given initiative. Like, hey, we want to be an AI company and AI forward thinking and all that. Well, we got to bring in change management to do that and help change the mindset. We're talking ITGCs. So the way I always explain this when I was in IT audit, especially when we were recruiting people to join the firm, and they'd be like, what do you guys actually do?" Um, so I always tell them a couple different ways. I go, "Hey, you know how, on your iPhone, you get these updates, right? The software updates. Like if there was a client, we would make sure that all the changes that are going now into your phone from Apple, that the changes was authorized, that it was tested, and so like somebody actually tested it. Who somebody made the change in the software, somebody else tested to make sure it worked, somebody approved that that change could go in to production, so that when it got to you, it didn't just blow your phone up or something malicious happened or something to that effect. And then with that, obviously, is the segregation of duties part, where those functions segregated, so that you didn't just have one person doing it and then access to production. So you couldn't just move the change into production. And they would go, yeah, okay. And then so the other example I give would be, hey, have you ever seen the movie Office Space? Most of them said yes. And I go, all right, you know how they got away with that con? Yeah. It's like, we make sure that doesn't happen. And usually people will go, oh, that sounds way cooler. I think I want to do that job. It sounded way cooler than when I would say we audited banking and insurance software. They usually didn't think that was especially cool. So that's always been my perspective, but I want to offer it up. Like, is there anything I missed? You want to add kind of your flair to that? How do IT auditors mostly audit change management and code changes?
So today, the way we are auditing them is we are selecting a sample of 25 code changes, typically at the deployment level. So what that means is basically as you are developing code, there's on typically three stages. You have a development environment, then you move to a staging environment, which is slightly more polished, and then you move eventually to the production environment. So today, what we're doing is we're testing about 25 changes that are moving to the production environment out of a population of well over 200,000 for a small organization. And that is how we are getting comfortable that are they following these controls? Are they following, is there evidence of proper testing, approval, segregation of duties? But the problem is like, that means we're testing less than 0.01% of the population, which brings into question, well, how much assurance are we really getting? Yes, you can take the approach, oh, well, because of standard deviations, I'm getting into that 95 percentile. Yes, absolutely. But you have to keep in mind that it only takes one mistake on one code change to have a massive, massive impact, as you saw with what happened with CrowdStrike.
And there's even then, so like I know when we would take our sample, inevitably there would be some kind of simple configuration change where I would always say just like flipped the flag. It wasn't a crazy, like nobody would really notice it. But so we get those and we'd be like, that's pretty low risk. Do we really care about these? And we'd have to kick them out, resample, and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes change management wasn't too bad to audit. Other times it was just such a pain, especially some homegrown systems, and trying to get that population of changes was always the biggest pain point for us when we were doing that. But speak about a little bit more of the risks here. So you mentioned CrowdStrike. Maybe summarize that story for those that may not remember or are not familiar at all.
Yeah. So what happened with CrowdStrike is there was a single developer who developed and deployed untested and unapproved code, which ended up causing a massive outage. And CrowdStrike ended up losing $12.5 billion because of this outage. Um, a lot of airlines, if you were trying to travel, you probably weren't able to travel because people's computer systems straight up weren't working. If they were using Windows and they received that update, their computer would not turn on because that change was made at what's called a kernel level. A kernel, think of it as like the cement foundation in your house. And then what's above that is the user level. That's where you live. That's where the framing is, your furniture. Well, this change was in that cement foundation. So when it basically failed, by design, the computer is designed to crash because the alternative can be significantly worse, where it actually is physical damage to your computer or can lead to data corruption. And what the change was in specific was the developer hard coded it to look for 21 parameters, but there was only 20. So when it got to looking for the 21st parameter, it couldn't find it. It didn't know what to do. So it crashed.
Yeah. I like the foundation cement house example or analogy. That was really good. All right. So that's how most of the world does change management testing and monitoring that. How are you and what your organization, your company, how are you guys changing that?
So what we're doing is we're instilling true system limitations to ensure the compliance with those same core three controls. So we make it where it's literally impossible to deploy code that was not tested, that didn't have proper approvals, that there was no enforced segregation duty. So we ensure from a true system limitation that that is happening. So now what it allows auditors to do is they can perform a test of one approach. And so instead of going out and testing 25 changes, now they can just test one. And because it's an automated process, then they're done, which is significantly faster because testing those 25 changes today on average takes a team of 7 to 12 people over a month to do.
And is it, because of course you have multiple systems. So I think about one of the larger clients we had like 60 in scope applications for SOX. And so, and most of them or a lot of them they followed the same process. And so we could just aggregate those and take our sample across the board from those. But inevitably there's always this, random one off. We do it different. We do it different. We do it different. Does your solution account for all that aggregation or how would that work?
So basically, how all software is being developed is essentially the same way. There is the developer who's actually developing the code. Then you typically have like a lead developer who's reviewing it, and then you have some sort of like QA testing and UAT testing. So everyone's following the same process flow. It's just more of do you have a development environment and then do you have a staging? Some companies don't have staging, or some companies will have multiple staging environments as well as a demo environment. So there's different ways you can kind of have a slightly nuance, but the same core approach is applicable to any company that you're going to be working at. Again, some small startups will, kind of cut some of these corners because they're not worried about compliance as much. It's not as much of a priority. But that's, as you grow, that's something that you have to abide by in order to pass these different audit engagements.
So for those that, again, maybe are not in like an IT audit role or IT in general, or even those that are, and just don't really understand how software is built, high level, explain that to the audience. How is software, for the most part, built?
Yeah. So think about if I am writing a book. There is something called a commit. Think of a commit as like a paragraph inside of a book. Once I write enough paragraphs, I take those paragraphs, essentially put it in an envelope, and I'm sending it up to the company server in order to then merge it with all the rest of the code there. That process, when putting those paragraphs into that envelope, is called a pull request, and it's just technical lingo for this is a change request. I'm requesting to make a code change, whether I'm adding code, editing code, deleting code. And that is where now the lead developer will then perform their review and approval of that code change. After that has then been approved, then it will typically go to your development environment, where then QA will perform their testing, as well as product or UAT will perform their testing, make sure that is this actually meeting the business requirements of the original request. Assuming that everything goes well, it continues that same process to the staging environment. It gets a little bit more polished, and then eventually to production, where now it's actually impacting and you see the end product as an end user.
The thing that I hated the most, we would go through the process, do our walkthroughs. Okay, that's how you do change management. Great, we'll take our sample. Inevitably, we would find out, usually too late, that there was some kind of emergency change process. So it's like, hey, we got to get this, we got to get this code moved in immediately. It's for an emergency change. And so because of that, the process is a little different, and we go around these controls, but then later we come back and address them. And so then we'd have to take a sample from those changes. And so how does that work with you all relative to emergency changes?
Yeah. So remember what I was saying with the different environments where we have the development, staging, and then production. You can, if it's a hot fix where you need to get this fixed immediately, you can bypass your development and staging environment and go directly to production. But even if you're going directly to production, we still enforce that there has to be evidence of testing, there has to be evidence of approvals and segregation of duties before you can deploy. So even though you're shortcutting the process because you got to get this out now, you still have a level degree of confidence over what is being deployed.
Let's talk about the good stuff, the best stuff, at least in my opinion. Around all this, now you have the data. And I want you to talk about the types of reporting that you can get out of this and the insights that you can get from this. Because usually what we'd have to do if you want to do any level of reporting, you'd have to go to the ticketing system. And that was really not great. One, because it was tough to get the data. Two, it just wasn't good to work with. And there wasn't a ton of insights you could really get from it. Most of that now is in like a Jira or something like that. And just, it really kind of made it a pain. So I know when we kind of talked offline, to me, the coolest thing was the data aspect of that. So what kind of data are people getting out of the solution, and what kind of decisions are people then able to make, which I think is, the most important piece of any kind of analytic.
Yeah. So basically, what we're doing different is instead of pulling that data out of a ticketing system, like Jira, for example, which is essentially a notebook, I can say anything, I can write anything I want in it. I can say I spent this X amount of time on it. Doesn't mean that actually happened. That's where we are going in and pulling this data directly from your code environment. So we are able to give you with actuals who did what, when, and how long did it actually take to write that one line of code? How long did it take QA to test that one line of code? So you're starting to be able to piece together the entire software development lifecycle. Who's doing what? Where are they spending their time? And then that's where you can start analyzing it to understand, like, who are your best performers? Are there potential roadblocks, or where maybe I need to hire more QA because there's a huge backlog of work that is basically not getting out the door because I don't have enough QA engineers to review it.
Okay. So audit time is cut down significantly in using this. There's legit insights and decisions that can be made out of this. And I think if we just stop there, people will go, this is like heaven sent, what we're talking about now. But then the third thing is the R&D tax credits. So speak to that.
Yeah. So there's a really, really great tax credit you can get for software development that can be very lucrative. You can save up to 50% on your software development costs. The problem today is getting that tax credit is incredibly hard, and it's very expensive. So even a small organization, on average, you're going to spend over $100,000 just to get this tax credit. So that makes it, for especially small organizations, maybe not worth your while. And especially now, starting in 2025, the IRS has increased its level of scrutiny around these tax credits, where now you have to evidence eligibility at a per code change level. Prior to this, you're able to do this at just a blanket project level. So I could essentially take a folder, stuff anything I want inside it, and say this entire folder is eligible. The IRS came out in 2017 saying, no, this is not acceptable anymore. Now we're in 2025, and now it's a hard requirement. So this will be the first year where now that scrutiny is in place. And that's where what our platform does is we automate that entire process. We show with hard evidence the eligibility for every single code change, what's eligible, what is eligible, what's not. That way you're able to get that massive return at the end of the year.
And you're talking about how hard it is to do that now. Why is that? Why is it so expensive, and why is it so hard?
Is because you're basically having to go and pull all of this evidence out of a combination of your ticketing system, out of a combination out of your coding environment, in order to then prove and evidence, hey, is this work that was new feature work? Is this work that was maintenance work? You have to evidence and prove that in order to get the R&D tax credits. And so I'll just give you an example. If I am working on a bug ticket and I am pre-launch, so I don't have any end users using this particular product or feature yet. Well, I can capitalize that time and I can get my R&D tax credits for that time on that bug ticket. But now once I launch and I have end users actually on their product, now that time is no longer eligible for those R&D tax credits. So that's where you have to really get into the minutia in order to prove that eligibility.
All right, Taylor, really, I know I've shown people sometimes at a code level, like how an analytic works. We'll pull up like Python and show them like how it works, run it, see the results, and they go, oh, that's what is going on. That's what's been going on this whole time. And I go, yeah. And they go, okay, now it makes a little bit more sense. So I think especially, basically the world runs on software. So I think a lot of people, IT or otherwise, probably have a little better understanding of that. Some of the risks, certainly. I love the CrowdStrike example. So thank you a ton. I think it's going to be really helpful for a lot of people. But with that said, I'll give you the floor. What do you want to leave the audience with?
I just kind of leave the audience with is that the recognition that software development is a little bit more of a wild, wild west than what we'd like to think, which as a result, as us end users are then the ones that are impacted. It's us, the end users, that are finding these bugs and have these negative actions happening to us. We're having to convey them back to the company. This is where we want to try to improve this process, where we're identifying these bugs, identifying these mistakes from an operational perspective and preventing them rather than letting them get deployed into the wild. So adding a little bit more structure around this, so we don't have money just disappearing out of your bank account. We don't have, our communication systems crashing when, something like CrowdStrike happened. We need to add more assurance to our IT environments.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.